Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining this webinar for a briefing on 4 countries facing the risk of famine and the role of the private sector in contributing to the response effort. I'm Angus Rennie. I'm the Senior Manager of Partnerships and UN Relations at the United Nations Global Compact, and we're delighted to be co-hosting this webinar briefing with the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, UN OCHA. This morning, we will be providing some detail on what is a major humanitarian crisis. Over 20 million people across 4 different countries in the world are facing significant threats of famine and starvation in very complex environments. And so we wanted to provide an opportunity this morning for our partners in the private sector to learn a little bit more about the situation and to understand how they may be able to get involved and to discuss with us how they may already be involved in the response effort. So just a brief overview of our agenda for the webinar this morning. We'll start with a crisis briefing from UN OCHA on each of the 4 countries. We'll then discuss a business guide that's been developed to help provide greater information on how the private sector can best contribute to help prevent famine and support the response efforts. We'll then go into a conversation with a private sector representative reflecting on the role of business in this situation. And then we'll move into a discussion with participants around the role of business, what companies are doing, how companies might be able to do more, what kind of partnership opportunities there may be in this situation. And we'll close with a few information points on some further action that may stem from this conversation. And so with that, I'm very pleased to introduce Ms. Mariah Little, who's a humanitarian officer at UN OCHA, whose work has been following the situation in each of the 4 countries to provide us with an overview of the situation on the ground and share a bit about how the UN and other partners are responding to this crisis.
Thank you. From my side, I think you have already a lot of the figures and data in the pack that was circulated to you, but just to highlight a few key points on the overall situation. So this is actually one of the key priorities right now in the United Nations and of the Secretary General Guterres himself personally, who has made a point of intervening several weeks ago with a press briefing, which is when I think probably a lot of people started hearing about these 4 countries at risk of famine. So far, one of these countries has already declared famine, and that is South Sudan. The other 3 countries have not yet declared it. And in South Sudan, the famine has been declared in 2 counties of one of the states, and these are 2 counties which have been priority problematic counties for some time now. The other key element that I would just highlight on the issue of famine more broadly is that while there are some climate-related elements to the famine in some of these countries, there is an overriding issue of conflict and lack of humanitarian access. That is a very strong and important feature when we're talking about the deterioration of food security in these countries. That is particularly the case in South Sudan, where the 2 counties that have been declared in famine have historically been very impacted by conflict and difficult to reach. In terms of the response, I would only highlight that the United Nations and its partners, its national NGO partners and its international NGO partners, have been in these countries for some time. So the response is not starting from scratch. There is already large-scale operations on the ground. These are very knowledgeable teams of aid workers that are on the ground that are working together with governments. So this is not starting from the beginning. This is a scale up to respond to specific deteriorations of food insecurity. So over the last 2 months, since there's been more of attention on these 4 countries, we have seen a scale up. In South Sudan, if you're looking at your pack and you can see the numbers of people who are in need, I won't go through all that again, it's a lot of figures. But we have managed to scale up substantially the food deliveries in South Sudan, Yemen, Somalia, and Nigeria in targeted ways: nutrition, health, and water and sanitation. And here I would just emphasize that responding to famine and preventing famine is more than just delivering food. It is about delivering a package of requirements that people need in order to be healthy and to basically be able to have some level of resilience against some of the presiding problems that have always been going on in these countries. So in 3 of the countries that we are now talking about, we actually also have cholera outbreaks. There's large disease outbreaks in these countries. So the health element is quite important. When you have people who are hungry, they're less able to resist disease that they would otherwise potentially be able to resist. So this is a full-scale package of assistance, and you will notice that we have highlighted 4 key sectors when we're talking about financial requirements in these countries, and that is the food, nutrition, water and sanitation, and health sectors, which we've pulled out. I thought I'd also briefly demystify some of what it looks like to actually deliver aid in these countries. I mean, there's been a lot of news reports, but there's a wide range of actors who deliver aid in these countries. So you have government, you have local government entities, you have small national non-government organizations, you have very large international non-government organizations, and then you have UN agencies. So in any one of these 4 countries, you could have between 150 to 250 different actors on the ground delivering assistance. And this is all pulled together in a coordinated way that has been agreed by the international community and governments under the leadership primarily of the government, because governments are first and foremost responsible for facilitating and coordinating humanitarian aid. But we also have put in place humanitarian coordinators, which are senior appointees. Sometimes they are also, the same person will also be a resident coordinator, which means that they also cover the coordination of development programs. And sometimes these people have 3 hats. They coordinate humanitarian, they coordinate development, and they also play a role when there is a political or peacekeeping mission in a country. So they feed into that as well. And the idea with having these multiple hats of the coordinating entities is that this person is empowered to really pull together all the threads of a response so that we are doing immediate life-saving. We are also paying attention to the long-term needs of a country, resilience, so that we don't have perpetually the same crises happening over and over again. Underneath that, you have a number of sector-based coordination mechanisms where the health people will get together and talk and decide what the criteria are, and the water and sanitation people will discuss and coordinate and analyze what the needs are. And these are often done with government entities present as well, so they are part of that discussion. That is the ideal. So when we put out these figures for what the requirements are and the needs, that's where it originates. It originates from the field at very grassroots level coordination mechanisms that decide what the priority needs are, and everybody is part of it. So when you're providing money to an agency or an NGO that is part of that mechanism, you are contributing to a well-coordinated, effective response. There are multiple ways that agencies deliver the assistance. In some locations where you have real problems with access, which, as I mentioned before, is a feature of these 4 countries. This is not so much a climate issue. These are protracted conflicts, and that has had an impact on hunger and basic services in these countries. So in some instances, it's very difficult to access people. And so there's a range of remote mechanisms that are put in place, either through airdrops, where there are those assets available, through local communities which are mobilized to help distribute items that are sent in through mobile mechanisms. So it's infrequent that there are locations that are absolutely impossible to access, because there's a range of remote mechanisms. But at the same time, there is also an important element of requiring political will from regional countries and member states to press parties to these conflicts to allow for access, because this is a major feature. I think I'll leave it at that. There may be questions that come later. We do have information already in your pack about the funds that are required. I would only highlight on that front that the scale up that we have been aiming to do to respond to famine or prevent famine is very contingent upon funds coming in. These funds enable immediate response, but they also facilitate pre-positioning. In each of these countries, there are different weather cycles, and when you're in dry season versus rainy season, this has a big impact on the ease with which we can move large supplies of food and other items around the country, particularly in places like South Sudan, where there are very few good roads. So once the rains come, you're dealing with non-existent roadways. So it's important that we're able to pre-position things ahead of time. But I would highlight in particular Yemen, where it's been very difficult for us to scale up, largely because it is only 5% funded at the moment, and there's a big need for funds there. And even when a famine has not yet been declared, there are different levels of food insecurity. I won't go into all the technical aspects of it, but I would say that it is important that you don't wait for famine to actually be declared. That's pretty much the end of the line once famine is declared. Before famine, when you're looking at people who are in levels just before famine or 2 or 3 stages below, it looks like a famine. People are starving and people die from hunger even before famine has been declared. Famine is a technical reference to something that you can already witness beforehand. So in places in Yemen and in Nigeria, South Sudan, and Somalia, even in those areas where famine has not been declared, we're talking about serious, severe food insecurity and malnutrition, where we have millions of children who are malnourished, and that impacts the future of countries. Malnourished children, if they're not treated, have long-standing health problems throughout their life. So this is also critical, not just in the near term for saving lives, but also looking forward in terms of the stability and development of the 4 countries. So I'll leave it at that and take questions at the end if there are any, and pass on to other colleagues who will talk more about the role that private business can play.
Thank you so much, Mariah. That was very helpful overview, and appreciate you emphasizing that this is more than just a simple food delivery question. This is the challenge of meeting a variety of basic human needs and health needs in very complex operating environments. And so coordination and planning and partnership are really critical. And your emphasis as well on the drastic shortfalls in funding, I think, is important for all of us to take note of. With that, I'm very pleased to introduce our colleague Mamaisa Mavu from the UN OCHA Private Sector section, who will give us an overview of the business guide on the 4 countries facing famine and some of the ways that the private sector can help. Over to you, Mamaisa.
Okay, thank you so much, Angus. Thank you for that, and thank you, Maura, for that overview of what's happening in these four countries that are at risk for famine. I continue to read about this all the time, and I'm very much aware of the situation, but I still can never help feeling so sad at the tragedy of what is happening, and it sort of gives me confidence in the job that we have, which is basically that the magnitude of these problems are so huge that we really need to be able to bring in as many partners as possible together to help us to support these vulnerable people. And that is the sort of the core as to why we really do produce business guides. And I'll first of all just briefly explain what a business guide is, just to give you an understanding of the background. So essentially, whenever there is a crisis, the humanitarian community tends to release a lot of information, and we find that sometimes this information can be really confusing and really cumbersome with a lot of technical jargon. So what we do here is that we try to create what we call a business guide that would try to present the information in very simple language. It usually gives an overview of the crisis, and then it talks about the humanitarian needs on the ground, and then most importantly, it goes into specific details as to what business can do to contribute to the crisis. Now, this is really important, we find, because a lot of businesses always come to us and say, look, we really would love to contribute, we want to do something, but how do we do it? What are the practical ways that we can really contribute? And that is what we try to do with these business guides. Now, you've already heard about the crisis and from Moira, and you understand some of the humanitarian needs, so there's no need for me to go into that. But I'll just maybe tell you a little bit about what business can do in this crisis, and I'll base it on the information that we sent out in the business guide. I hope you have it in front of you so you can follow a little bit of what I'm saying. So there are three main ways that the business can contribute. So the first one is to make a financial contribution to a pooled fund. The second is to provide in-kind or service support. And the third is to provide a commercial offer. I'll start with the first one, basically contributing, giving a financial contribution to a pooled fund. This is generally always a good idea because pooled funds are considered to be an efficient mechanism of humanitarian financing because they reduce transaction costs, and they also allow for better prioritization of assistance amongst different organizations in a coordinated way. That's very important, the fact that it's coordinated. There are two main types of pooled funds that you can contribute to. The first one is a country-based pooled fund. Now, this is a country-based pooled fund is a fund that is dedicated to a specific country that meets top humanitarian needs and priorities. If you look at the business guide that we've sent out, we have links for each country, which if you click on, it will take you straight to the CBF, and it will take you to a click to donate page. You can donate directly to a country-based pooled fund. Second way that you can contribute is through what we call the Central Emergency Response Fund, and that is CERF for short. This is a global fund that provides immediate funding for emergencies, so it ensures that people in a crisis would get immediate access to food, water, shelter, healthcare, and other important services. Just to give you a little bit of background on that, in 2016 and this year, 2017, CERF has already allocated over $112 million to Nigeria, South Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen. And recently it also provided $40 million to Nigeria and Somalia. But this is not enough. As we've heard from Mara, the magnitude of the crisis it's so huge that we need more. CERF needs to be replenished on a continuous basis. So if you would like to donate to CERF, again, you can click on the link on the business guide that will take you directly to the CERF page where you can donate. Thirdly, if you don't want to give cash, then you can provide an in-kind donation, product or service that matches your core competency. If you would like to get more information on how you can do this, you can write to us at pss@un.org, and together we can talk about what your core competency is, what is it that you can donate, what the conditions are, and connect you to the appropriate organizations. So, as I said to you earlier, when there's a crisis, the humanitarian community releases a lot of information on a crisis. and one of information as well as products. Now, one of such products that the humanitarian community releases is called the Humanitarian Response Plan. Now, this is basically developed for any crisis that requires assistance, and it helps the community to coordinate the response. What it does is that it provides a really good analysis of the crisis, and it identifies the needs, all the needs. So basically, if you would like to go further and get some more information, understand a little bit better what the magnitude of the crisis is in these 4 countries, then please then go to the links that are provided on the business guide. If you click on it, you will have access to the full plans where you can read and understand a bit better. Lastly, I would like to highlight something which is rather important, important part of our work here in OCHA. We manage what we call the financial tracking system, that's FTS for short. It's a pretty important system. It reports all humanitarian contributions, including cash and in-kind donations, and it allows us to better analyze the crisis, plan the response, and not only that, but it also allows us to improve aid transparency. So basically, it enables us to give visibility to your generosity. We would encourage you, deeply encourage you to please report under FTS once you provide a donation. Now, I say donation because if you provide cash via the CBF or SURF, it automatically is recorded on FTS. If you're then providing an in-kind donation, then please, we encourage you to report it to fts@un.org as well as pss@un.org. This is also on the website. Okay, so I'll stop right there, and then, of course, afterwards we can probably talk a little bit more when we get to questions and answers.
Thank you so much from my side. On that final point, let me just add from the UN Global Compact perspective, the real importance of companies making sure that they are letting the United Nations know about the different contributions that they're making. We want to ensure that we're keeping good records of that, and we're able to give proper recognition to private sector contributions where they are made. At this point, having had an overview of the crisis on the ground in the 4 countries and some of the ways that the response effort is being coordinated and rolled out, and with the overview of the business guide, we'd like to have a conversation now about the role of the private sector in the response. And just a bit of housekeeping, if participants of the webinar do have questions, we would encourage you to submit them in the questions box in your webinar panel, and that way we can moderate them and bring them to the panelists to answer as appropriate. So maybe just to start off, we did hear a bit from Mariah about coordination and the effort and why that's important. Maybe to further pull back the curtain, just quickly, we hear a lot of acronyms being used in the UN system. HRPs, it's not an acronym, but the cluster system. Perhaps you could just give a bit more detail around those structures and those tools and how they're being deployed, so that our business participants can have some understanding of how, a little bit more, how we're working in these situations.
Sure. You will frequently see references to humanitarian response plans, HRPs. These are essentially response plans that have been pulled together under the leadership of a humanitarian coordinator, an empowered leader on the ground who is coordinating both UN and non-UN actors. And it is signed off by the government. Sometimes it's even jointly done with the government, but the government is involved in the process of prioritizing what the response is going to look like. There are always more needs in a country than everyone can address. And the humanitarian response plan is based on thorough analysis that is done before the plan is produced each year, and it is often updated at the mid-year point to make sure that it's still on target. And the key thing to remember about humanitarian response plans is that they are done together as a collective with agencies, NGOs, non-government organizations, both national ones and international ones, as well as UN agencies. So when funds are provided, we always prefer that those funds are provided in line with these HRPs, with these humanitarian response plans, because by doing that, we are ensuring that the programs that are being funded and implemented are in line with what the government and the humanitarian community on the ground have identified as being the main priorities. That keeps the response efficient. It keeps the response from focusing on things that aren't actually critical at that time. And if there's any doubt when donors are providing funds, they can always contact OCHA in the private sector support section in particular, and they can ask, you know, which is this NGO that has asked us for funding or that we're thinking of providing funding for? Is this part of the local plan that has been put in place by the United Nations together with the government? So we can always help to do that. I'd also emphasize that the clusters, when you hear clusters, this is really just a fancy word for a group of people, a group of agencies in each of the different sectors. So the health people meet together, and the water and sanitation and food. And together, these groups meet on a regular basis. They are streamlined into the overall coordination system, and they feed back on the needs, on where the gaps are in the response, on where the challenges are, on what the financial requirements are for the agencies that are part of those sectors. And they also provide advocacy, and they're keeping track of what's happening in a country. And so together, these different parts of the coordination system feed up into what you see as the humanitarian response plan. You'll also see, if you're looking around on the different web pages for the countries through OCHA, you'll also see things like the Humanitarian Needs Overview, the HNO. This, again, is linked to the whole process of developing a plan, and it is an assessment that is done every year, sometimes more than once a year, that establishes in all the key sectors of a crisis what the needs are and how many people and where those people are in terms of humanitarian needs. The one other thing I would just say on this is that sometimes when we're looking at the figures, we're looking at very large numbers here in the billions and hundreds of millions. But as I mentioned before, there are also the large-scale mass food distributions, but then there's also smaller-scale programs that are just as important. And they work in small communities. They're addressing needs that don't necessarily have, you know, millions of people attached to the project. So there's a range of ways to support programs that are meaningful and impact people. There are NGOs who are delivering nutrition support to children. And I would recommend going onto some of the agency websites. There are a number of NGOs, the major NGOs and UN agencies, and they have a number of, they have a lot of advocacy on their pages that show that you can actually rescue children who are malnourished. They can recover when they're given fairly simple nutritional inputs. They do recover. And so it's not a lost cause by any means, and it's not that every donor has to give $150 million. There are opportunities for smaller scale donations that OCHA can also help to identify where those opportunities are for businesses that have particular interests in different sectors or want to fund something. And we shouldn't get lost in the big numbers all the time. There are international country member state donors, and there is an expectation there for large funding, but there are also many opportunities with partners for smaller scale donations that have a big impact. It doesn't always have to be the hundreds of millions of dollars that make an impact on people's lives. So we're here to support you in identifying those opportunities.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful advice for companies looking to optimize the impact of their contributions, to understand that by aligning with the planning and coordination, HRPs, the cluster system, that they can really make their contributions go farther and have greater impact. In that regard, many companies may have pre-existing relationships with NGOs, which, as you said, sometimes have more bite-sized opportunities that companies feel more able to take on and support and partner with. How would a company looking to make sure that they are optimizing the impact of their contribution check to see whether the NGO partner or prospective partner is indeed part of that planning and coordination structure you've just described?
Well, every humanitarian response plan has a list of the participating agencies and NGOs. So that's one way to find out. The other way is to contact us directly, and we can also check in with our field offices there, see if maybe there are different names for different organizations. There are also local NGOs that may not be represented that are usually implementing partners for the larger organizations. And again, it's usually it's better to be funding through the known agencies that are part of the planning process. They in turn also use a variety of local partners to implement when necessary, although a lot of them do direct delivery themselves. And some of them have very large staff in country, and they've been working there for many years, a lot of these NGOs. So the advice from our side would be look within the HRPs for the list of the countries. There's also projects that are identified in each of the project sections of these humanitarian response plans. It shows sort of what the requirements are for the different sectors. But we are also here to help identify if you have a pre-existing relationship with an organization. We can check in and find out if that's the case. I think it was also mentioned the other mechanisms for funding. We have humanitarian pooled funds in country, and those have a lot of flexibility for where funding can go in smaller amounts. So these are really key ways to be able to do quick funding as per immediate needs that come up with non-government organizations. OCHA manages that fund, and those have proven to be very useful in quite a number of countries. As emergencies come up, it keeps us flexible and agile, and those are important funds. And sometimes those are funds that donors who don't have the $150 million to put in, you know, a couple $100,000 goes a long way in a fund like that. We're talking about smaller projects that make a big difference because they're locally identified and locally prioritized. So yeah.
Thank you. That's very helpful. For companies that want to contribute in kind or with financial contributions, how are they recognized? How is that contribution recognized? I know from the Global Compact perspective, for instance, our platform, the UN Business Action Hub online platform for connecting the UN and business, is always eager to showcase good examples of collaboration between business and the United Nations. And we also, in disasters and humanitarian crises like this one, have a focused section of the platform devoted to helping companies and UN partners find opportunities to work together. And we're always looking to showcase examples of success in that regard. And so we, as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, very much encourage companies who are engaged with the UN or with NGO partners in response to this crisis or other crises to share their stories with us so that we might showcase them to encourage other businesses to follow the good examples. The financial tracking system is, of course, another very important way that we want to ensure that we are aware of and communicating the impact that business is having in terms of financial contributions. And so that is one of the reasons why we do encourage you to share that data with us. Another question around potential volunteer contribution of volunteer staff. This is a complicated one, but one that may be of interest to companies. We've had companies ask about secondments to the field. Perhaps from you and OCHA's perspective, just a bit of information about how some of the challenges that kind of a contribution may pose, and how working through the coordinated structures is the optimal approach.
Yeah, on the issue of staffing, again, the agencies that are on the ground, these are experienced organizations. They have been working in country for a long time, and there's some established hiring practices that they have to staff their offices, so that they have the right people in the right place doing the right thing. It's not always useful to have volunteer staff unless there is an agreed relationship with these organizations, and the staff that are being proposed on a volunteer basis are really experienced in the areas. Obviously, there is a large history and relevance to volunteer staff in crises globally. And we see this a lot with health workers, health NGOs. So it's an important element of the aid response, of volunteer work. But it would be necessary in the case of this crisis to have case-by-case discussions with the agencies to see if if volunteers are required, or if there are other types of assistance that they need instead. That would really have to be something that would be discussed individually with the key agencies, to see if they actually have the capacity to absorb more staff, because staff do require capacity to absorb, whether they're volunteer or paid. These are not easy operating environments. These are not often locations where you just sort of show up and rent a house and live in it. Sometimes there are very strict security situations, and you have to live within certain compounds, and there's limited space. So there's lots of logistics dynamics to staffing in each of these 4 countries that are unique. But certainly, if that is something that was being proposed by a certain company or business, that would be something that could be discussed depending on what the staffing requirements would be. But this would really be up to the agencies on what they need and what they can absorb. Similarly with in-kind, again, sometimes in-kind is useful, sometimes it hinders. Often there is a need for finances so that organizations can kind of decide what they need and when, but that doesn't rule out in-kind requirements, although often in-kind have to be shipped in, and it also requires a certain amount of logistics in locations where logistics are very complicated, and there are set systems that are tried and true, and the big organizations have already figured out what they need, and so sometimes it's not always useful to be adding items to that. But again, this comes down to discussions on the country-specific needs and the agencies that are working there, which is a conversation that OCHA can always help to facilitate. We have negotiated a range of contributions in different crises across the world over the years, and we will continue to do that.
One other opportunity that we wanted to discuss was longer-term engagement on some of the issues related to the protracted conflict, the complex operating environments, the impact on, for instance, human migration, some of the bigger picture challenges where business may have an even greater role to play. And so with that, I'd like to ask my colleague Tina Mili from the UN Global Compact to share a bit about some of the work under development here at the Global Compact in terms of business engagement.
Thanks so much, Angus, and everyone for the really great conversation. So yes, the UN Global Compact is building a platform on humanitarian action to further kind of explore and identify how companies can support and maximize their impact in this area. It's not specific to the 4 famines, but like Angus mentioned, we're really exploring also the impact on forcibly displaced people. We will work with companies and the UN partners as well as other stakeholders over the course of 2 years. And the conversations will be kicked off in India at our Making Global Goals Local Business India event at the end of April. So we invite all of you to, of course, come to India, but then also if you're interested in joining the platform, this will be a great opportunity for you to help us finalize the framing and the expected outcomes. So please do reach out to us to learn more about the platform and also guidance on how to join this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. With that, I think I would just reiterate that we do want to hear from companies who participated in this conversation or who may be listening in to the recording of this webinar, which we'll share after the fact. Let us know how you are responding, where you would like to get involved. The private sector section at OCHA is standing by. May just pass over, technology allowing for them to have a final word as well.
Great, thanks. Well, I think that with the time short and people having busy lives and work to do, I think that the best thing is if it's anything other than finance that your company would like to contribute, then please do contact us, because every situation will be specific and we can help direct you either to one of our operational partners or work with you to ensure that the contribution, the in-kind contribution, whether it's expertise, finance, or human resources in some particular way, is particular and effective in delivering on the needs in any of the 4 countries at risk of famine. And please do write to us at pss@un.org, and we'll work with you to make that happen. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andy, so much for that. And thanks to everyone who's been able to join or who is listening in on this conversation through the recording. We do look forward to continuing to work together. As we said at the outset, this is a major humanitarian disaster crisis situation which requires all sectors to contribute actively to the response efforts, and we look forward to working together in that regard. Contact information is on the slide in front of you, and please do get in touch. Thanks.